He lay where the riverbed had cracked open under the sun, the channel long emptied of water and softened only by drifting dust. His mane was pressed into the pale earth, strands tangled and dulled, carrying the color of the ground itself. From a distance, his body looked like part of the landscape, another shape shaped by heat and time, still in a place where movement usually never fully stopped. The first warning came from that stillness. Lions did not rest like this, stretched too straight, too exposed. Reserve staff noticed him as they passed, their concern spreading quietly through exchanged looks and lowered voices. A lion so close to an open track, unmoving, invited urgency. Some slowed. Some reached for radios. The word down carried weight even when spoken softly. But one man did not move immediately. He stopped where he was and watched. He had learned, over years spent close to animals, that danger was not always loud. Sometimes it announced itself through absence. The lion's chest rose but barely. Each breath lifted dust from the mane and let it fall again in a thin veil. The rhythm was uneven, as though the body were negotiating each inhale separately, unsure whether the next was worth the effort. The tail lay still behind him, stretched long along the dry ground. No flick. No reflexive twitch to chase flies away. The ears rested low against his head, not pinned back in warning but slack, heavy. When a faint breeze passed through the riverbed, carrying the smell of hot earth, the lion's whiskers stirred, but his eyes did not sharpen. Others stepped closer, cautiously. The lion did not react. His head remained down, chin almost touching the dirt. His mouth was slightly open, lips dry, tongue just visible behind them. There was no sign of injury, no blood, no swelling, no unevenness that explained the collapse. That absence unsettled them more than any wound might have. The man watched the small things. The way one forepaw was tucked under his chest, claws half-sheathed. The way the muscles along his flank tightened briefly at the end of a breath, then released. Exhaustion lived there, written into posture and timing rather than expression. "He's breathing," someone said quietly, as if stating it aloud might help anchor the fact. The man nodded but did not step forward yet. He waited through another breath cycle, then another. He noticed the pause between them stretching, not dangerously long but long enough to suggest effort. This was not rest. It was a body conserving what little it had left. A shadow crossed the lion's back as someone shifted position. His ear flicked once in response, then fell again. It was the smallest acknowledgement possible, and it carried no threat. His eyes opened briefly, unfocused, catching light without holding it. They closed again almost immediately. Recognition settled in the man's chest, heavy and quiet. He had seen this before, not often but enough to know its shape. Animals came to this edge not because they wanted help, but because something inside them had already failed to hold the line. This lion was not guarding territory. He was not avoiding a threat. He was waiting, though for what even he might not have known. The others hovered now, the air around them taut with restrained urgency. Radios crackled once, then went quiet. No one raised their voice. The man lifted a hand slightly, not to stop them, but to slow the moment itself. "Something's wrong," he said, not as an alarm, but as a confirmation of what the body on the ground had been saying all along. The dry riverbed stretched around them, empty and exposed. Dust lifted and settled again with each faint movement of air. The lion lay where the water once ran, breath shallow, strength drawn inward, his presence heavy with meaning that had not yet revealed itself. Concern did not arrive as fear. It arrived as recognition, of imbalance, of a body out of step with its world. And in that recognition, the moment deepened, waiting to show them what the stillness was asking for next. The man moved forward slowly, letting each step announce itself through intention rather than sound. Dust shifted beneath his boots, a dry whisper that carried across the open riverbed. The lion did not lift his head. His body remained as it was, pressed into the earth, breath shallow and uneven. There was no tightening of muscle, no shift in posture that suggested readiness to defend. The absence of reaction was its own signal. Closer now, the man could see the fine details others had missed at a distance. The lion's sides moved with effort, each breath pulling in and releasing with a faint delay, as though the body were working against resistance it could not name. His mane lay flattened and tangled, filled with grit that dulled its color. One eye opened briefly as the man entered his field of awareness, the gaze unfocused, sliding past rather than fixing on a threat. It closed again, the lid heavy, deliberate. The land around them felt emptied. Sound carried farther here than it should have. No distant calls answered the open space. No movement rippled through the scrub beyond the riverbed. A lion lying exposed like this should have drawn attention, curiosity, challenge, response. Instead, the air held only silence. The absence pressed in, heavy and unmistakable. The man stopped a few paces away and lowered himself slightly, reducing his shape without closing the distance further. He watched the lion's ears resting low against his head. They did not pin back. They did not lift. They lay where fatigue had placed them. The tail remained still, stretched out behind him, its tip dusted white from the ground. Not even the flies provoked a flick. A soft sound left the lion's throat then, barely audible, more breath than voice. It rose and faded without direction, not a call meant to carry. His chest tightened with the effort, then relaxed again. The man waited through the next breath, then the next, noting how each one seemed measured, chosen. There was no pride nearby. The man could feel it as clearly as if it had been spoken aloud. No scent of fresh movement. No layered tracks pressed into the dust. Whatever bonds usually surrounded this body were absent now, leaving him exposed in a way that felt deliberate rather than accidental. The man shifted his weight slightly. The lion's ear twitched once in response, a small acknowledgement that cost him little and offered less. His forepaw moved a fraction, claws scraping softly against the dry earth before settling again. The motion carried no strength, only reflex. "It's all right," the man said quietly, the words released without expectation. The lion did not look at him. But his breathing changed, subtly, the next inhale drawing a little deeper before easing out again. The pause that followed was shorter than the ones before. His body remained heavy, but something within it had adjusted, as though the effort of awareness had found a steadier place to rest. The riverbed stretched on in pale lines around them, cracked and empty. Wind moved lightly through the space, lifting dust and letting it fall again. The man listened beyond the lion, beyond himself, for anything that might answer. Nothing did. The lion shifted his head slightly, turning it just enough that one eye opened again. This time it lingered, the gaze still unfocused but present. His jaw parted and closed, a small motion that suggested discomfort more than threat. Another soft sound escaped him, quieter than before, and then there was only breath again. He was holding on to more than life. That much was clear. Something had brought him here, to this open, exposed place, and it was not confusion or fear. It was restraint. The careful use of what little strength remained, directed not outward but inward toward staying. The man remained where he was, letting the silence hold them both. Around them the land stayed tense with absence, waiting. The lion lay still, breath shallow but ongoing, his presence heavy with meaning that had not yet fully surfaced, asking not for urgency, but for patience enough to understand what he had come here to give. The warnings came softly at first, carried in glances and murmured words from behind him. Distance was advised. Time was questioned. Risk hovered at the edge of every suggestion. The man acknowledged them without turning, his attention fixed on the body lying in the dust before him. He did not argue. He simply stayed. He shifted his weight and lowered himself further, careful not to shorten the space between them too quickly. From where he stood, the lion's breathing remained visible, shallow and uneven, but still present. The man set a small container of water on the ground beside him, not pushing it forward, not angling it toward the lion. He let it rest where it was, an option rather than an offering. The lion did not react at first. His head remained pressed into the dust, mane flattened and pale with grit. The air was still enough that the sound of his breathing carried faintly, a dry pull followed by a softer release. When the wind shifted, lifting dust into thin ribbons, it brushed over the lion's face and carried the scent of water toward him. His ear twitched once. It was a small movement, almost accidental, but it did not go unnoticed. The man did not respond outwardly. He did not move closer or speak. He allowed the moment to pass, understanding that attention itself could be pressure. Time stretched. The sun edged lower, changing the quality of light across the riverbed. Heat softened slightly, though the ground still held it. The lion's chest rose and fell again, the rhythm marginally steadier than before. His tail remained still, but the tension that had held it rigid seemed to ease, just enough to let it rest fully against the ground. Another breath left him, deeper this time, followed by a faint sound that traveled no farther than the space between them. It was not a call. It did not seek response. It seemed instead to mark effort, a release shaped by fatigue rather than voice. The wind carried it away almost as soon as it formed. The man remained quiet. He did not reach for the water. He did not gesture. His presence was shaped by what he did not do. The warnings behind him faded into silence as others adjusted to his choice, recognizing that this moment could not be hurried without being broken. The lion's eye opened briefly, the gaze unfocused but aware. It drifted in the man's direction without locking onto him, then closed again. His breathing changed once more, the pause between breaths shortening slightly, the next inhale drawing a fraction deeper. The water sat untouched, but the scent lingered. An ear lifted and settled again. A forepaw shifted, claws scraping softly against the dust before finding a new resting place. Each movement was minimal, conserving energy, but together they formed a pattern. Response without resistance, awareness without alarm. Trust did not arrive suddenly. It accumulated quietly, built from the man's refusal to advance, from the steady rhythm of his own breathing, from the shared stillness that allowed the lion to remain where he was without needing to defend or retreat. No contact was made. None was required. The land around them remained open and silent. No pride answered. No movement disturbed the scrub beyond the riverbed. The moment belonged entirely to what was happening, and what was not. The lion released another low breath, softer than the last, and his head shifted a fraction, angling slightly away from the sun. The movement was small, but it carried intention. He was adjusting, not surrendering. The man stayed where he was, letting the quiet do its work. Trust here was not something exchanged. It was something allowed to exist, fragile and unspoken, carried on the wind and held together by patience, by restraint, and by the shared understanding that stillness, when honored, could become its own kind of shelter. The shift came quietly, marked not by urgency but by pattern. The lioness's breathing changed again, no longer only shallow with exhaustion, but gathering into brief, controlled pulls that came and went with intention. Her body tightened, then released, not in reaction to the man or the land around her, but inward, guided by something older and more precise than fear. Those watching felt the moment before they understood it. The stillness sharpened rather than broke. The lioness's flank drew inward, muscles contracting in a way that did not match injury. Her tail lifted slightly from the dust, then settled again. A low sound moved through her chest and escaped on the wind, deeper than breath, quieter than a call. It carried effort, not distress. The man recognized it all at once. He did not speak. He did not step forward. He shifted back instead, slowly, instinctively, as understanding spread through the group behind him. What they had mistaken for collapse was transformation. What had looked like withdrawal was preparation. The land seemed to hold its breath. The lioness's head remained low, mane pressed into the earth, but her focus turned inward. Her eyes closed fully now, lashes dusted pale. Another contraction moved through her body, visible along her flank, the skin tightening and releasing in waves that traveled with purpose. Her breathing synchronized with the movement, each inhale deeper, each exhale shaped by restraint. No one approached. No one reached for radios or tools. The warnings that had once filled the air dissolved into silence. This was not a moment that belonged to intervention. The lioness shifted her hind legs slightly, claws scraping softly against the dry riverbed as she adjusted her position. The sound was small but deliberate. Dust lifted and settled again around her. Another low sound followed, carried only a short distance before the wind took it. It was not pain. It was work. Time stretched, measured now by the rhythm of her body rather than minutes. The sun continued its slow descent, light thinning and softening across the cracked earth. With the next contraction the effort became visible, undeniable. The curve of her body changed. The space beneath her tail darkened. Life emerged quietly. The first sign was small and easily missed, a subtle movement against the dust, damp and fragile. Then another. A shape, slick and unsteady, slid free and rested against the ground, barely stirring. The lioness released a long breath that seemed to carry weeks of strain with it. Her body trembled briefly, then settled. No one moved. The cub lay still for a moment, the silence stretching dangerously thin. Then, faintly, a twitch passed through the tiny body. A ripple of movement followed, uncertain but real. Breath arrived, shallow and uneven, mirroring the first breaths taken by countless lives before it. The lioness turned her head slowly, neck stiff with fatigue. She did not rush. She did not rise. She reached instead with the careful precision of instinct, her muzzle brushing the cub's side. The contact was light, almost questioning. The cub responded with a small movement, a soft sound that barely broke the air. The land exhaled. Those watching stepped back without being told, increasing the distance as though drawn away by gravity itself. What had begun as concern now settled into reverence. The danger they had anticipated had transformed into something more delicate, more profound. The riverbed, dry and exposed, had become a threshold. The lioness gathered herself around the cub, adjusting her body to shield it from the open space. Her breathing steadied again, no longer strained but deep and anchoring. Dust clung to both of them, blurring their outlines into the earth that held them. The man remained still, farther back now, his presence no longer part of the moment. He watched as witness only, understanding that what unfolded here was not meant to be altered or claimed. Life had arrived where they had expected loss. And in the quiet that followed, as the wind moved gently across the riverbed and the light softened toward evening, the truth settled fully. This stillness had never been asking for rescue. It had been asking for space. Dusk arrived gradually, softening the harsh lines of the riverbed and cooling the air around the lioness. The heat that had pressed down all day eased its grip, replaced by a thin breeze that carried the scent of dust and distant grass. The lioness lay still for a while longer, her breathing deep and steady now, each rise of her chest purposeful rather than strained. The effort that had shaped her body earlier had not emptied her. It had clarified her. The newborn lay close against her belly, small and dark against the pale ground. Its movements were faint but persistent, a slow wriggle followed by stillness, then another attempt. The lioness responded with careful adjustments, drawing one hind leg in, shifting her weight so her body curved around the cub without pressing it. Her head lowered, and her tongue passed gently over the cub's flank, deliberate and unhurried. The action was quiet, instinctive, restoring order where there had been strain. Strength returned to her in visible increments. It did not rush in. It gathered. Her shoulders flexed slightly as she repositioned herself, muscles answering again with coordination rather than fatigue. Her ears lifted, rotating once to catch the changing sounds of evening. The world beyond her body had re-entered her awareness, and she met it without alarm. The man watched from where he stood, farther back now, his outline dimming as the light thinned. He did not step closer. He did not linger at the edge of the moment. He understood that his role had already ended, that what remained belonged entirely to the land and the life it carried forward. He shifted his weight, careful even now, and began to retreat, each step placed softly into the dust. The lioness did not look up as he moved away. Her attention remained fixed on the small body pressed against her warmth. The cub lifted its head briefly, unsteady and unsure, then let it fall again, breath fluttering and real. The lioness responded by drawing closer, her body forming a shelter shaped by muscle and heat and patience. As the man increased the distance between them, the riverbed seemed to widen, reclaiming its quiet. Shadows stretched across the cracked earth, filling the spaces where concern had once gathered. The sounds of the reserve returned slowly, an insect's hum, the faint call of a bird settling for the night. Nothing announced itself loudly. Everything resumed its place with restraint. The lioness shifted again, this time gathering herself more fully. With effort that no longer looked uncertain, she pushed her body into a more upright position, then settled back down, adjusting until the cub was secure beneath her chest. Her breathing remained calm. Her posture held readiness without tension. She was no longer waiting. The man stopped once more at a greater distance, turning only briefly to look back. In the fading light, the lioness and her cub had already begun to blend into the landscape, their forms softened by shadow and dust. There was nothing dramatic in the sight. No final gesture. Just life continuing where it belonged. He turned away then and continued on, carrying with him the quiet weight of what he had been allowed to witness. It was not a story to be told loudly. It was something to be held carefully, like the last warmth of the day lingering on skin. As night drew closer, the wild closed gently around its own. The riverbed cooled. The wind moved low across the ground. And in the dimness, a lioness lay with her newborn, strength settled back into her body, the land receiving them without comment as darkness arrived, patient and complete.